So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of these strings. We're gonna take off the pick guard. We're gonna make sure all the wiring and everything is in order, that there's no loose solder joints, and we're gonna clean this bitch up. So let's get started with that right away, no reason to wait. We're gonna detune our strings. Get, that tension off the neck. And the condition of the neck to me at this point is really unknown. The frets look like they're in basically brand new condition. They might just be able to be polished up and go, or we might have to do some more work in that regards. It might need a level. We don't know yet. I'm just gonna make sure to get rid of some of that background noise. Make sure in the window. That should do it. Okay, so once we have these strings all nice and detuned and widened down, and some people ask me like why I use one of these pillows instead of something specifically designed to hold the guitar neck, and I just like this one. It puts points on multiple places so that the neck is supported well. Anyway, it doesn't really make a difference. I'm gonna go ahead and clip the strings. Could do 2 at a time. And you gotta be real careful when you're clipping strings like this. They could go flying right into your eye. They could poke you. There's a lot of shit that could go down. So I'm just gonna push these through the back. Some of them are gonna be more stiff than others. And looks like we're gonna need to take this black plate off because it's not really aligned properly. Those are the wrong screwdrivers. Pretty sure I had a right screwdriver here, right there. So let's take off the back plate. And you want to make sure that you use the right size screwdrivers for things like this. You want a nice tight fit. You don't want to strip down screws just by having to take off the back plate, simply because you don't know how long you'll keep this guitar. If you do end up keeping it 20 or 30 years, you don't want the screws completely stripped down by the time that you do a few setups. And you can use an electric screwdriver if you want. I wouldn't recommend a drill or anything for something like this, just because you don't want to drill in too hard and strip the holes for the screws. I guess it's gonna be pretty dusty in there. You can use condensed air or something like that to clean it off. You don't necessarily have to use a rag. But I find that like automotive detailer works great because it's designed to work safely on metal parts and painted parts and plastic parts and the same things that your car is made out of, your guitar is made out of. So let's see what's going on back here. We got 3 screws. We got that big old block right there, which I'm not sure is original, judging by the way the bridge sits. But the next step is determining that first by taking out these, and I'll use one of the bass strings to thread these small ones through, since they've been stuck in there for so damn long. And you know, this girl who owned this guitar, was obvious that she did not know what she was doing in the least bit, and that, you know, the setup of the guitar suffered tremendously because of that. Not that she made any adjustments on her own, that probably would have been worse. But now that we got those out from the bridge, what we're gonna do is strip them off at the headstock. And there's people that find lots of different creative things to do with their strings after they clip them off. I throw them out because I don't like having them sit around poking people. It's dangerous, especially when you've got kids around and you don't want kids messing with sharp metal wiring that's been cut at tough angles. And you know, it looks like one of the idiots that wired this guitar took the string and wrapped it back through the post multiple times. And I'm gonna have to clip some of that off. I don't know why someone would do something like that. I mean, even when this guitar was new in 2009, you could have easily went on YouTube or Google and figured out how to change your strings. This is fucking ridiculous. What kind of idiot would do something like that? I might need a pair of pliers to take this out. I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver, a small one. Being careful here not to damage the body in any way. I'm just going to bend that tip out so that I could drag it back through again. Problem is whoever did this appeared to know what they're doing, but looks like they were intent on creating a pain in the ass for the next guy to work on this guitar. This not being the best string clipper on earth doesn't help the fact, but we're gonna try to do the best we can. It might take a minute to get this extra bit of string off, and sitting down probably will help. It's not too bright in this room, so I'm just gonna turn this tuning pegs. And now when you have the strings off, it's a good time to check these tuning pegs, which, you know, after 10 years, usually have to be tightened. Not always, but usually. And there's like a straight fucking knot in this thing. There we go. Now that I got that loose, I can just pull that piece through and toss it. So to see what's going on with this bridge, we gotta get these saddles off. And that's what we're gonna do right now. One trick to avoid scratching up your guitar by your little screwdriver falling off is by using a piece of cardboard. Just sticking it right there under the bridge. And when you take these screws off, you want to make sure that you sit them on the side in the same order they're on, only because the little ridges on the saddle that's imprinted by the screws, by the strings, you don't want to mix those up. Like, you want the saddle that was your low E saddle to be your low E saddle again when you put these back on. And this generally takes a minute. You want to make sure we keep those springs and that you keep the right screw with the right saddle. And you know, at least these have these bent steel saddles. What I like to do, if I'm working on the side, I'll just screw this in. Just like that, just so that the screw doesn't get loose. I like putting the same screw back into the same saddle. Call me crazy. I know this video is gonna get long doing this like this, but somebody's gotta do it, right? Just gonna line them up in the same order that we're taking them off. And we don't necessarily have to take all 6 off just to see if we can tighten the bridge block or whatnot. But it does help. It'll help us clean these parts up also, because these parts are filthy and really need to be cleaned. I know a Stratocaster is a great guitar for setting up amateurishly. What I mean by that is that you don't need really to be so much up to date. You just need to have some experience playing these things, and you learn with time. Some people would be afraid to take their bridge apart like this, but you know, if you've intonated your bridge before, it's not a big fucking deal. You just want to make sure not to lose any of these little screws, and the best way to do that is to make sure that you put them aside in a way that's not going to screw those up. So because the strings that were on here were so old, the tension rating's not even when they detuned pretty quickly. I have a feeling that this bridge has a lot to do with that. But there may be some other issues also, like the nut. I've yet to look at that comprehensively and make that determination. I first want to just clean up the guitar because this thing's so filthy. And yes, this does take a while, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. So what I'm just gonna do right now is I'm gonna pick the right head for the screws, which is a Phillips number 2 over here. I'm gonna make sure that I back them off a little and then tighten them back into the block, which seems to be, you know, the case here. And you want to use the right head because you don't want to strip these screws. I mean, they're easy enough to replace, but you don't want to run into a pain in the ass like that when you're just trying to set up your guitar to play. So it looks like these were kind of loose, and now I've tightened them back up. And someone definitely made some adjustments to this bridge before, though. You can just tell because the middle screw seems to be a little stripped. What someone did was use the wrong bit for their screwdriver, and basically because of that wasn't able to tighten it, or that bridge block that's in there, you know, just the tension that was on it pulled it off after a while. So now that we have that done, what we're gonna do is take off the pick guard and see you know, what kind of shape the electronics are in here, if everything's original. It does look to be original, but we're just gonna double check just to be sure, because you never know what some asshole may have done. Just because the guitar looks, you know, like it's mint condition doesn't mean that under the hood it's in mint condition. The same thing goes with your car. Sometimes a car looks great from the outside, but under the hood it's got its fair share of issues. And I plugged this in. I've seen that it works, yes, but the last thing I want to do here, actually mess around with these electronics that are in here. Simply because it's not my intention right now. My intention is to clean this thing up as stock as possible, get it to stay in tune, get the action to where, you know, it's comfortable, get the neck feeling like a new Fender neck. And that action at 8/64, that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's crazy high. I don't know how anyone can play with action that high. And sometimes you walk into Guitar Center or any one of these chain music stores, or even the smaller mom and pop shops, and the guitars are set up so freaking poorly that they'll have, you know, brand new guitars with 8/64s, and it's like, dude, can't you guys just make these small adjustments right before you put this thing on the shelf so that it stays that way, instead of just letting the setup of the guitar deteriorate to the point where it's something like this? These are a lot of screws on this pickguard, damn. This might be smarter and easier to use, you know, a bigger screwdriver with the right size head, but since this is a good size screwdriver that won't damage the screws and won't strip them to any extent, that's what we're going to use. You always want to use the right size tool. You never want to force anything in there. So now that we got all the screws off, what I'm going to do is lift the pick guard up from this end. You see that? I'm going to show you this cavity. There's a bunch of white powder in there. And that powder is probably from like glaze or whatever it is at the factory that they use to buff this out. You see those little pockets right up here? It looks like some funny stuff, but we know what it actually is. And what I'm gonna do to clear that out for now is use some condensed air. With the little straw attachment. Simply because I just don't know what the fuck this stuff is. And I don't want it anywhere near me. Or my kids that might be playing with this guitar. This is a little weak, so we're gonna move along to the big size can. And these cans are great for cleaning all types of electronics. So this says 15 February 2010 stamp on the pick guard, so I guess it looks like the neck was made sometime in 09. If you remember being 09. And I have like a very powerful electrical duster. And there's some fucking nasty shit in here. We're gonna let that sit for a minute. And see what else is in there. And what I can do in the meantime is take a microfiber cloth, being very careful not to spray any of the electronics on the guitar. I'm gonna take this Mother's Instant Detailer, 1 or 2 sprays in the corner of the rag, right there, and just quickly clean up in here. And you know these holes that are used to hold the guitar in place when it's being painted, they're full of this white powder also. Rubbing compound most likely, or some kind of glaze or something that dried up from the factory. But the good news is, as you saw, everything looks original. Which is good. Get all that powdery residue out of there. And there's even some like mold or some shit growing in there. And I might need to get some rubbing alcohol. But you don't want to do too much. That looks about clean enough. So when you put this back, you want to make sure to go underneath. You do it from the top first, and that's just so that everything aligns properly. You know, with the neck pocket, we're gonna make sure these screws all line up, and we're gonna put in 2 screws first at opposite corners, just to hold the pick guard in place. We're not gonna tighten them down too much yet. We'll do that once we have all these in place, just to make sure that all the holes are lined up in the same place they were before we took the pick guard off, and that we don't put them back in at an angle and need to fill those holes and re-drill them later on. So we do this in like an X pattern. the screws back into place. And you see a lot more of these neglected guitars when you're shopping for Mexican and Squire stuff, really, than on American stuff, simply because the people that bought and paid for American guitars in those price ranges, you hope that they know what they're doing and that they know how to set up their instrument and that they'll take proper care of their instrument so that it lasts them for the proper time span that an instrument would last, because this thing has been going on 10 years without being set up properly, and another 10 years from now, if this thing isn't taken care of now, it'll basically be a junker and needs very serious repair work, as opposed to now where we're doing, you know, I'd say a pretty basic setup, nothing really crazy, especially since those frets, when you run your hand up and down the fretboard, they don't feel sharp to me at all, which tells me that this guitar wasn't in an environment where the humidity changed too frequently. So the next thing you do, just check your tuners, make sure all these nuts are tight. You can tighten them with whatever you like, really. You can even use a plier or a pair of needle nose if need be. That's not the most important thing in the world. The jack is also a little bit loose, so you want to tighten that up in a bit. But the first thing we're going to do before we tighten any of that stuff up is get rid of that rag with all the weird white powder on it. And we're going to get a new one, a clean one. And the first thing we're going to do is do some detailer on the cloth and just give it a once over pretty much everywhere. Make sure we clean the bridge here. Tighten down these screws. You don't want to tighten them down too much, just enough so that there's no pressure and no resistance when you turn it. That's what you're looking for, is the resistance when you turn it. You don't want to apply too much torque to it. Now what I'm going to do is pop off the toe knob. Just like that. You put your screwdriver in and you ease it up, ease it up, ease it up, and we'll see what's going on down there. So it looks like the plastic from when the guitar was new is still underneath there. That weird plastic that's on these pick guards when the guitar was new. When you peel it off, there's always plastic stuck underneath here, and the only way to get it off is to pop it off. So why don't we just pop off all of these. So what's odd about this guitar is that there are 3 tone knobs, if you can see. So I guess one of them went missing at one point and was replaced with a knob that was another tone knob instead of a volume knob, which makes no difference to us, really. I mean, And there's just a ton of plastic. Yeah, look at that. And that just like interferes with the smoothness of the pots, and then you don't know how they're really, you know, how they move. You don't get a good feel for it. And we're gonna make sure we got all that plastic off. We don't want any of it. Yeah, we could use a screwdriver to just and now that we have that off, we can clean up around these pots. We check to make sure none of them are loose. And we'll just toss them back on. Just like that. Turn them to the right, make sure the 10 is pointed to you. And voila. Now that's a lot better. You don't hear that sandpaper noise anymore. You know, the knobs are much smoother and easier to deal with. Now, I'm not going to take the output jack off simply because I think it's probably in good enough of condition. Let's go ahead and spray the guitar again. And some people are really against using these like automotive cleaning parts, but I don't give a shit. They work well. And when you buy these like guitar polishes, they're just taking turtle wax and repurposing it and selling it to you for about 5 times the price. Carnauba wax is Carnauba wax. There's no difference. We're gonna clean the back of the neck with this stuff too. And we want to get the headstock too. Oh, in there, it's filthy in there. Just behind the nut here. And going to do a good job in between the tuners. I'm gonna clean this entire headstock because it was filthy. And what's funny is this is actually like a beautiful piece of wood. This neck, it's just a gorgeous piece of maple, but you wouldn't know it just because it's been in such poor condition. There's some nice flaming, and even I see some like bird's eye on the back of this neck. It's a really nice neck and it's a nice guitar. It just hasn't been taken care of. There's nothing inherently wrong with these guitars. I mean, yes, they do come set up very poorly from the factory many times. That's just something you have to deal with. You take the dry part of your cloth and go over it after about a minute when everything's dry. And already we're seeing like a big difference in, you know, the guitar. Make sure you get the sides of it. That's something I forget to do fairly often. So now that we got that done, the next step is going to be to apply some wax to this guitar. I'm gonna use the Music Nomad one now just because the turtle wax leaves a much worse smell that I don't want to deal with right now, just because it's late at night. But yeah, we're gonna polish this bad boy up with some wax. And you can even use turtle wax. This turtle wax is really good for guitars. Super hard shell. It puts on, like it says, a super hard shell of wax. The funny thing about this black plate is 10 years later it's still got the plastic on it. So that goes to show you how much this girl actually played this guitar. So let's just wipe it down real quick. We just want to make sure that that automotive detailer is nice and off before we apply our wax here. So with the wax, what you're going to do is take the wax, you're going to apply a little bit at a time, about that much, the size of like a dime really, a nickel if you want to put on a nice thick coat. You're going to dab it, and we're going to go in a circular motion around the guitar, and don't be afraid to get this crap on the pick guard. You could even wax the pick guard if you want, that's not a big deal. The pick guard is plastic. You can get this stuff anywhere on the guitar really. It'll dry up and you'll be able to wipe it off. So, I'm gonna put a drop more, and we're gonna wax the plastic on the pick guard with just a tiny little drop. The reason I'm doing this is just to really protect the paint, you know, to clean up that plastic, get it nice and shiny. And so many people will call me an idiot for waxing the plastic pick guard, but say what you will. So I'm first gonna do the front. I'm gonna give it about 60 seconds to dry. Add a little bit more just in the bottom here where I didn't reach. And if you hold it up to the light, you'll see where it starts to turn white and powdery, and that's when you know that you can start to buff that wax off, and it'll come right off, leaving a super fine little thin layer of wax to protect the paint from things like, you know, pig scratches and whatnot. And there are a lot of people that, you know, will tell you that you're an idiot, and if you put on a tiny little bit of wax on your paint, it's gonna hurt the sound of your guitar, and that's complete nonsense. There's simply no science behind that. In fact, there's very little science at all behind any of the claims regarding how paint and tone wood affects the sound of a solid body electric guitar. Haven't seen very good arguments for that. And so I'm gonna take the dry part of my cloth, and I'm gonna start wiping off the wax since it's already hazed over. And you don't need to go crazy. Just make sure you're using like super soft microfiber here. Next, we're gonna wax the back and sides of the guitar. And I find like the wax gives me, and most people hate this, putting guitar wax on the back of the neck, but I find it helps me. I mean, if you have sweaty palms, it might not be the best idea, but if you don't, waxing the back of your guitar neck can help your speed improve and can help the comfort of the neck. You don't want to go crazy with it, but just a little drop here and there. You know, we're not going nuts here. A tiny little bottle of this stuff. I mean, yeah, it's $10, but it goes a long way. I must have waxed like 50 guitars using this tiny little bottle of Music Nomad, and I don't usually use that. I usually will use car wax because it's a lot cheaper, but I have that laying around, and it happens to smell really good. And if the ingredients are even in here, I don't know, but it looks like it's just some kind of white Brazilian carnauba wax. It's basically the same shit you'll find in most automotive waxes. Get the horns here when you're applying wax. And you want to wax the side of the guitars as well. We're not going crazy here. We're putting on a thin coat for protection purposes. We're not doing this to make our guitar really shine. Although you could put a couple coats on if that's your intention and if you really do that. But we're doing this by hand so you could see that our goal is not to buff this out to the highest shine possible, but just to get a little bit of protection on the body after being exposed to the elements for so long. And while that's drying down there, I'm gonna put a tiny little drop on the neck. I'm gonna do the back of the neck. And just be careful not to get any of this shit on the fingerboard, especially these rosewood fingerboards. It's not a big deal on a maple fingerboard. You could even wax a maple fingerboard, but on a rosewood fingerboard, if you get this stuff in the cracks of that open wood, it's gonna take you a long time to clean it out, and you're gonna be sitting there with some type of toothbrush or something similar just to clean it out. When it comes to waxing the front and the logo, we dab a drop right on the logo, right on the front, and we go in small circular motions. And we do in between the string tree, the tuning pegs. We do the back and the front of the headstock, the back of the neck, the back of the body, and we let it sit for about a minute. This has a little dent, letter D of the Fender, but that's not a big deal. We don't care about that, do we? And you can see it's a lot shinier and cleaner now that we've used our automotive parts on it. I'm just gonna, take off whatever is left of this. Whatever hasn't dried yet. It'll dry by the time I get to it. And this is supposed to be candy apple red. When I got it, it looked more like a midnight wine, simply because it was covered in dust and filth and grime. And you can see, yes, that's a beautiful shine right there. Between these tuning pegs, make sure to wipe off the wax we just applied. You could do 2 coats. 2 coats is a better idea just because you get more coverage, but for the purpose of saving time on this video, which is probably already about 45 minutes long, we're just getting started. We're just gonna do it once and make it nice. So the springs, that's a pretty big bridge block. I'm not sure if every Mexican Strat has a bridge block that big. The ones I've seen have, and maybe that's just some of them have that might have been upgraded at some point, but it makes no difference to us at this point. And we'll take a dry cloth and just go over with it once quickly to get, when using the back side of your microfiber cloth, sometimes the wax seeps through, so we just do this to wipe off any excess wax before I get started on doing anything with the fingerboard. So, as you can see, the guitar is nice and clean at this point. Now we we get to these saddles, what we do with these saddles is again use Mother's Instant Detailer. We're gonna find that cloth we were using before, and I'm just gonna clean them a little bit, and I'll put a little bit of lubricant maybe on the height adjustment screws. And these height adjustment screws, I don't know if you can see this, but they're almost all the way up there to the top. There's a lot of room to go down, so I could have adjusted the action easily like that and probably gotten 2 to 3 64ths of an inch down, gotten the action down to 5 64ths, but that's not the right way to do this. The action that's being high because of things that are happening at the neck level is something we want to pay just as close of an attention to. Now that there is wax on it, the automotive detailer works much better, so I'm just going to quickly, rub these out. You can even do this with, you don't need to use a cloth because that's not the most effective way. These aren't too dirty, so a cloth will do just fine for our purposes. Remember to keep them in the right order. What we're going to do is just clean them, give them a little polish. And that's it. This isn't rocket science. It's just doing the grunt work. And I know this is going to be a really long video, but it's important to know how to do these things, right? You don't want to be the sorry sap that's paying somebody else to set up your guitar and then have them do a half-assed job at that. Now it's more of a pain in the ass than taking these off, is putting them back in. Fortunately for me, I've set up enough strats that I can pretty much get the intonation close to where I want just by eyeballing it. I know how the pattern in which these need to be arranged in order for the intonation to be close. And so I'm gonna start putting these back in now. And I'll give them like a final wipe down once it's actually on the guitar. And we're gonna put our piece of cardboard right back down. Again, get our Phillips. Screw these back to about where they were, more or less. I mean, we're gonna make some final adjustments to the intonation later on, so this isn't too much work. That should be good enough. It could even be looser than that. Remember, righty tighty, lefty loosey. Remember, the spring goes in back near the saddle, not by the head of the screw. And once we get the strings back on, I'm gonna put on a new set of strings. What we're gonna be looking for in the bridge is about 1/8 of an inch of a gap here, and to make sure that gap between the top of the bridge and the bridge block is gone for us, because that's what likely causing the tuning instability in this guitar. And I've taken apart so many of these Fender guitars. This one being made in Mexico. The parts are good. The parts on a Squier are not as good. This isn't the cheap pot metal that's used in Squier. I'm sure it's not solid steel either, but there's nothing wrong with this hardware in comparison to, you know, an American Strat. There's a very big difference between the hardware on an American Strat and a Squier, even one of the Squier Classic Vibes, which I own 3 or 4 of. So I don't want to hear the you're just hating on Squier. I actually really like those guitars. I just like to give an honest opinion about them. That the pickup selector switch and the pots, yes, they're great guitars. I absolutely love those Classic 5 guitars for the most part. Maybe more so than I like these Mexican Fenders. It's just the parts on the Mexican Fender are superior. Not so much the labor, because the labor that goes into this is just, you know, there's a reason they're made in Mexico, and that's because Fender wants to be cheap. They want to save money on producing these things, so they give you decent quality parts. They're just not the greatest parts in the world. And once I put this back, I'm going to show you about how the saddles need to be arranged so that you don't have to go too crazy when you're adjusting the intonation. You'll be pretty close. It's sort of like a decline for 3 and then a bump and another decline on 3. I'll show you what I'm talking about. To go. Yes, this is a pain in the ass doing by hand. It would be better to use some kind of drill. But the fact that I'm doing this by hand, I find as a big positive to know that I can do that with this guitar. That it's not too fragile. And that all the parts work. And that when you're in a bind, you can just pick up one of these anywhere. Why I'm doing that like that, but it's better to just push it back here. Sorry about that, just checking on the kiddos. So if you're gonna see the way that I put these back, you have, starting with the high E, you have a little bit of an angle downward. You have a bump right here on the D string, and that's gonna go back down also. And this is not perfect, but that's about how you wanna put them back in. Yeah, so as far as cleaning is concerned, it looks like we're all good. The next thing I'm gonna do is put some lemon oil on the fretboard, and I use this stuff very sparingly. I'm not one of those religious believers in lemon oil. I think there's a lot of different oils you can use, but what's great about the lemon oil is it smells really nice. So I'm gonna use a nice clean cloth. I'm gonna dab some of this stuff lightly. I'm not gonna push too much. Just a little bit on each fret that I can. And we're gonna rub that into the rosewood. Just a little bit. And I don't like to get too close to the frets when doing this because I just don't want, I don't know what kind of reaction the glue that holds these frets in would have to lemon oil. But I do know that in general, lemon oil does a good job. And since this fingerboard is filthy, and I don't really want to play it in that condition or get any of that stuff on my hands, I'm going to just rub this in nice and easy. I'm gonna check it out. Could use a little bit more. And now, when I'm dabbing it, there's barely anything that's touching the fingerboard, so don't think that I'm going crazy here with the lemon oil. That's not the case at all. There's barely anything coming out of the bottle. And you can use like the little applicator that's on this. I think this is $5, and this will last you for hundreds and hundreds of setups. I've used this on maybe 50 setups so far, and the bottle is still pretty much full. So a little bit goes a very, very long way. And your guitar is needed about, I'd say once or twice, maybe 3 times a year, depending on the humidity where you live. It's not so much the humidity, it's the changes in humidity that cause the issues. Now what I use to polish the frets is completely different, and yes, lemon oil will stain your frets, but it's nothing you can't polish back up. Now once you have that applied, take a clean part and rub off the excess lemon oil. You only need a drop of this stuff. It goes a very long way. Oh, it smells so nice. And I guess, you know, when you're working with guitars, like this one smelled like the girl that bought it. So I'm pretty much happy to sort of get rid of that smell and clean it up and do what I need to. So now, if we're gonna look at the back and fit this bridge plate the way it was before, you could see that block is not aligning properly. And that's not necessarily a problem. It'll probably shift when I put the new strings on now, which are a basic set of Diodarios, nothing special. Yes, I like the NYXLs, and the fancy strings are nice to have, but these cost $2 a pack, and those cost $10 a pack. That's 5 times as much, and I can't spend $10 for a set of strings, not with the amount of guitars that I go through. Okay, so we're first gonna find our brass and red. I could do this 2 strings at a time, really. You just find the thicker one. The thicker one goes for the low E and for the A. And the thinner one. It may even be faster sometimes if you do this one at a time. Just depends on how fast your hands are, how well you know the instrument. Green and black. So the D is going to be black, the G is going to be green. And a lot of times when you see used guitars for sale, they don't need too much of a setup or too much adjusting. Just like this guitar. All it really needs is some love and an owner who wants it to last and who makes the investment not only in their playing but also in their instrument care and making sure their instrument is top notch. So I don't really know what's going on with this neck on this guitar. I haven't looked at it closely yet. What I want to do is get the new set of strings on with the right amount of tension on the neck, because I really don't know what happened before. There might have been the same set of strings on here for 10 years for all I know. And my goal right now, that I have the guitar pretty cleaned up and smelling nice and lemony, whoops, where'd that string go? So like I was saying, my goal is to now determine what additional steps I need to take to get this thing playing well. Now that it's all cleaned up and I know everything is in order, what we're gonna do is string them up. And the way that I like to string the guitar is 2 posts past the post that I want. And we line up all these tuners, and you can look for this string locking method. There's a million of them. I prefer the vintage tuners. I'm gonna line up the whole straight to make my life a little bit easier here. And I'm gonna start with the low E, string this up. Little hoop right through, straight. About 2 tuners past where we are, we zip it back. We take the string down underneath the existing string. We pull, we make the bend, we come back over, and that's it. The string is locked in place. When you look at that. And now we can just put our finger down, grab our little winding strip, and I have one of these that attaches to a drill bit. It is to a drill, and it's very, very helpful in setting up these guitars. But sometimes the old-fashioned way is easier. And always the old-fashioned way works just as well, so we won't go crazy. There you go. And now we clip off the excess string. And you want to go for about, you know, the length that I do, 2 or 1.5 posts past the existing post that is for this string. That's about where you'll get 2 to 3 full wraps and maybe 4 on, you know, the thinner strings, and that's about what I like. So again, I'm going to push it back to where we would have had 2. I'm going to wrap the string back down underneath and pull it over. And now the string is locked in place, making my life a lot easier. And that's not the tuning peg, by the way. That's my string winder making that noise, just in case any of the smart asses has anything to say about it. I'm gonna clip the strings. And go on to the next one. And so the vintage tuners that Fender makes are a lot easier in that you just clip your string first, then poke it in the hole and take it back around, which is in many ways a lot easier. But, and there's always a but, this method works just as well. So it takes a minute or 2 longer. The end result is exactly what we want, though. Always important to clip your strings. I've seen some idiots, you know, they have the entire string just sitting there and they're gonna end up poking their eye out or hurting themselves really badly. And you know, safety is not something to joke about. When you have kids, you'll learn that very quickly. If you yourself are just a big kid, that's a different story. But here in my home, we want to make sure that safety is our first concern. So, and I'm putting my finger down on the string just so that it winds evenly down the post. You understand? And sometimes, like in this case, you have to unwind it back down a bit and do it over again because your winding just won't come out evenly, and it's not something we like to mess with. We want them to be, you know, even. We want the right tension on the string. There we go. Heard that? And I'll quickly bring these up and show you, you know, what it looks like after it's all done. I just want to get these clippings out of the way first, so 2 more strings to go. And then we'll finally see what's going on with this bridge and this neck and everything else. Of course, first I'm gonna let the guitar sit, Probably until tomorrow, just because it's a little late out here right now. Do the loop, swoop, and hoop method. Just like your kids with the shoelaces. And you know, this string tree is like screwed down all the way into the guitar. And it's gonna have to go eventually. But eventually doesn't mean right now. But when someone does something like that, messes with a string tree, someone who doesn't know what they're doing, that's a pain in the ass repair to make, because you have to fill that hole and drill it again. And it's just, it's not that it's difficult, because it's not, but it's a pain in the ass is what it is. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes tools, and as you can see, all of this stuff adds up. This time adds up. This is not free time over here. Time is money. Time is valuable. And while as a hobbyist you may love working on your guitars, there's no reason to do work that's unnecessary. I mean, would you want your car to break down just so you could fix it? That's the mentality some people have with these guitars. It's a mentality that's completely ridiculous. And the strings I'm using are, you know, standard 9 to 42. Come on, we can do it. Tension is back on now. We're not in tune yet. I will tune now, clipping the last string, this high E. Bam. And as you can see, a very clean and nice install on the strings. You got just enough wraparounds on each go. And there's that string tree again. Well, these tuners kind of feel a little weak, but what you expect for 10-year-old Mexican Fender tuners, you can't expect much more really. I'm just gonna grab a pick, which I have here, and I'm gonna tune this bitch up, put it in playing position. That's just a little sharp. And I'm just making sure to tune this with a tuner, even if it's a clip-on tuner. I don't want to do that by ear. And you can see like these tuners are complete shit for the most part. And you can see like that goes flat almost immediately. I don't even have to wait 10 seconds. It's in tune now. I tune the next string. I go back to that E, and that's already flat. Yep, completely out of tune already. I want you to just see that. So, it does seem to be playing a little better now. I'm gonna just measure the action here and measure the relief just so I can get some kind of readings and know what I'm really dealing with, you know, on a number level. That way I know what we have to work with and what we need to do going forward. I'm gonna let the guitar sit with the tension of the strings, but before I do that, I just wanna measure and jot down, you know, what measurements I have on the setup, just so that I can make sure we're in the right place. And now, when we look at the bridge, that's a lot better. If you see, there's no gap between the bridge and the block. And that's something that had a lot of impact on the tuning stability for sure. I'm just gonna grab my capo and we're gonna make some measurements. Capo is seen to be right here, and so what we're going to check for is a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is take the capo and put it on the first fret, and these are like Stratocaster basic setup tips. We're going to use our string action gauge now, which is an extremely important tool for us in this entire setup process. And you know, hang on, we're almost done for the night here. If I could find where I put that action gauge. So, to measure the action, we're gonna keep the capo here at the first fret, and we're gonna go down to the 17th fret. And that's easy to tell usually on strats. It's after the two dots, two more of the frets with the dots. So we're usually right here where the neck meets the body. That's where you want to be measuring. You're gonna measure every string really, and they should all read the same height. So here we got about 9 or so, maybe 8. It's far less on the A string. It's about 5. We're getting about 6 on D. About 6 again on G. And on the treble side, we're getting 6 to 7. So really on the bass side, we're up a lot higher than we are on the treble side, but is that because there's no buzzing on this guitar, and that's because the action is so high. I like to hear sometimes a little bit of buzzing and then work my way up back off on it. And the reason for that is to get the action to be at just the right place where if it was any lower, it would be buzzing, so we'd get it at basically the best type of action that we could get on the guitar. Now we're gonna check the relief on the neck, and we're gonna use the string action gauge too. If you see here, it has thousandths of an inch. So that's the one we're looking at. The first one right over here, the 10,000ths of an inch. And how we do this is, again, the capo's on the first fret. We press down right here by the last fret, and that will create a straight edge for us, which is the string will be completely level, and that will really let us get a measurement of the space between the fret and the string. And so we're gonna go up here to the 8th fret, which is what Fender recommends, and we're gonna check, and we're between 20 and 30 thousandths of an inch, which is like, that's ridiculous. There's just way too much. Take some more measurements right here, man. A little bit down the board just to make sure. So over time, that neck has really bowed forward, and we need to adjust. We need to bring down that relief to, you know, factory specifications, which is about 10 thousandths of an inch, and we could do that very simply. The next thing we want to measure over here is the height of the pole pieces on the pickup to the strings, and that's different because that's more of a personal preference, and that's something that is, you know, unique to each type of set of pickups. So you want to check your specifications and factory specs for that. The way you do this is very simple. You press down again on the last fret, and you measure from the top of the pole piece to the top of the string, and to the bottom of the string, actually. Sorry, and here you have about 8, so that's got to be higher. So we'll deal with that in a little bit. What I'm really looking for right now is what we're doing at the bridge, and the way you measure this is you take this again, right here at the bridge, and you want to measure right up to here. If you can see, right up to here. If you want, you can find something that's 1/8 of an inch and jam it in there, and that way you'll have the, you know, exact height that you want, so that you can then go back and adjust the springs and get this down to where you need it to be. With this tension in the guitar pretty much as close to being in tune as we could get it to at this point without making those, you know, fine adjustments, we're looking first and foremost, before we do anything on the neck, and before we do anything with the nut, we're looking to get the right gap over here. And the right gap is 1/8 of an inch or 8/64 of an inch, which is what Fender recommends. And we're gonna look at this, and this is like a little bit on the high side. So we're getting about 12 here. So that's too much of a gap. And the way that we're going to adjust that is by pushing these 2 screws in a little bit. What we're gonna do first is detune the guitar just a tad. I mean, you don't need to go crazy here. And then we're gonna make adjustments little by little until we get that down to the 1/8 of an inch that we're looking for. And this is really better done with one of those long screwdrivers, but too lazy to go find one right now, so I'm just gonna use this, and that's why I'm detuning, just so that there's less work for me to do over here. You could take the springs off for this, you don't necessarily have to. I'm gonna adjust it, you know, about a half a turn. I think a little bit more should do. Make sure not to, you know, damage that ground wire. Okay, now we're going to tune back up. Tune it on. And you might have to do this a bunch of times actually, because you just don't know. You see that E is already like flat. Sure, we could be using a more accurate tuner, but you know, these work just fine, these superstars. Tune this up. And this process takes a couple hours. Even once we adjust the neck and we do everything we need to do here, and we get this thing really playing well, the problem that you're gonna face is having to make all those minor adjustments all the time. And so now we can measure again and check and see if we're where we want to be. And that looks a lot better. So we're just about perfect. And we have that right where we want it to be. Because that's in the right place right now, the tuning stability has improved. It's not great yet. We still need to do the work that we need to do on the neck, but we're getting better. The drops aren't as, you know, big. We're not going as flat as we were before. See that? Okay, so one more quick spray of the mothers, just because we're just about done here for the night. And what I'm gonna do is put this guitar back on the stand. I'm gonna let it sit until tomorrow, just so that the tension on the strings can get in their place. Once I adjust that truss rod, I want the strings to have been on there already for a little bit. And a lot of people stretch their strings. I do that a lot also. Not always, but sometimes. And so there you have it. That's how you clean up a dirty, you know, Mexican guitar. And next we're gonna go through making all the minor adjustments we need on the neck and the pickups, and doing the fine tuning of the bridge, tightening up all the electronics and everything like that, and getting this bad boy to play the best way possible.